Imagine waking up one morning to a message that feels like it was ripped straight from a nightmare. Your heart pounds, your mind races, and the world you thought you knew suddenly tilts on its axis. For Prince Harry, that morning arrived with a wave of disbelief, anger, and heartbreak. A letter from the palace had landed in his hands, a letter that would strip Archie and Lilibet, his children, of every title, every privilege, and every claim to the royal family legacy. And then came the claim that seemed almost too impossible to grasp. Archie and Lilibet were not real. How could that even be true? And yet, the evidence was whispered about behind closed doors, in corridors of power where secrets festered, and now, it was staring Harry in the face. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The moment Harry realized the enormity of what was happening, he felt the full weight of a lifetime of love, duty, and family loyalty crashing down around him. It wasn't just about titles or public perception. It was about his children, his flesh and blood, and the unthinkable accusation that they might be illusions in a game far larger than he had ever imagined. It's the kind of revelation that makes you question everything. The trust you place in your closest allies, the people you thought had your back, and the very foundations of your family's story. And yet, here we are, at the precipice of a scandal so explosive, so unprecedented, that it threatens not just the reputation of the royal family, but the very notion of truth within its walls. You might be asking yourself, how could this happen? How could a father, a king, a grandmother, or a mother be in a position to make such sweeping, irreversible decisions? The answer is complicated, tangled in a web of palace politics, media manipulation, and decades of hidden histories. It's a story of betrayal and ambition, of secrets carefully preserved and suddenly exposed. And it begins, as so many royal dramas do, behind the closed doors of the palace, where power is wielded quietly, decisions are made in whispers, and the consequences can be catastrophic. Let's pause for a moment and picture Harry's world in those first hours after receiving the letter. Imagine the silence of his private residence, the distant hum of London life carrying on as if nothing had changed. But for Harry, the world had shifted. A parent's heart knows no title, no privilege, no legal documentation. When you hear that your children, your little ones you've watched grow, loved without hesitation, are suddenly being told they don't exist in the eyes of the monarchy, the emotional blow is indescribable. Anger mixes with disbelief, sorrow with confusion. Every memory, every bedtime story, every gentle hug now feels scrutinized under a lens of suspicion and accusation. And the palace, as always, moves with precision. Every announcement, every leak, every statement is calculated to maintain a narrative, to protect a legacy, to control the chaos that might otherwise explode. But this time, the chaos was personal. For Harry, the private and public spheres collided violently. He wasn't just facing questions from the press or tabloids hungry for sensational headlines. He was staring into the abyss of his own family's secrets, secrets that some insiders had hinted at for years, but which he never dared to confront. And now, confronted he was. But why now? Why at this moment, in the midst of so many other scandals, conflicts, and media storms? The timing, insiders suggest, was strategic. King Charles and Queen Camilla, driven by decades of political maneuvering, familial pressures, and perhaps even personal vendettas, had decided that the timing was perfect. Harry's distance from the royal household, his outspoken criticisms, and his high-profile life in the United States provided the perfect storm. It was a calculated move, one that would both assert control and send a message, not just to Harry, but to the world. And in true royal fashion, the message was delivered with surgical precision, leaving the intended recipient reeling before the broader public even caught wind. To understand the full impact, one must consider what titles and privileges really mean in the royal context. They are not just ceremonial. They are symbols of legitimacy, recognition, and inheritance. To strip a child of these is to cast doubt on their very place within the family's hierarchy. It is a declaration, in effect, that the child does not belong, that their identity as a royal is invalid. And for Harry, a man who has always valued family loyalty, who has fought to protect his children's innocence in the public eye. This was more than a bureaucratic decision. It was a direct attack on the core of his life. Now, layer on top of that the most shocking element of all, the suggestion that Archie and Lilibet are not real. What does that even mean? Could this be a metaphor, a symbolic gesture? Or is there a deeper, more disturbing implication? In the hushed conversations within palace walls, there are those who claim that the revelation is rooted in concrete evidence, DNA results, inconsistencies in public appearances, and statements from previously trusted aides who had begun to question what they were seeing. Whether true or false, the allegation itself is explosive, creating a storm that Harry must navigate with both care and ferocity. And yet, amidst all of this, there is an almost cinematic tension in the story. Imagine Harry, pacing his room late at night, reading and rereading the documents, phone in hand, scrolling through messages, trying to make sense of whispers and half-truths. Every detail matters. Every hint is dissected. Who can he trust? What is reality? How do you protect your children from a truth that may or may not exist? These are not hypothetical questions. They are real, immediate, and harrowing for a father suddenly thrust into the center of a scandal that threatens to consume him, his family, and his very identity. For the audience, the stakes are just as high. We are drawn into this story not just by the royal titles or the palace intrigue, but by the human drama at its heart. A father grappling with potential betrayal, a family torn apart by secrets, a monarchy confronting its own fragility. These are universal themes magnified to almost unimaginable proportions. And as the story unfolds, the audience is invited to witness every twist, every revelation, every shocking turn that will test loyalty, love, and truth. And there are questions that keep the tension taut, questions that will drive this narrative forward through every chapter. What exactly led King Charles to this decision? Was it personal? Political? A combination of both? How did Meghan react when she learned of the palace's move? And perhaps most haunting of all, are Archie and Lilibet truly what they seem? Or is there a deeper secret hidden in plain sight? The introduction cannot end without a lingering sense of suspense, a hint that what has already been revealed is only the surface. For Harry, the journey has only just begun. There are documents he has yet to see, conversations he has yet to confront, truths he has yet to digest. And for the audience, the story promises to unfold with increasing tension, emotional complexity, and shocking revelations that will challenge every assumption made about the royal family. Imagine a storm breaking in slow motion. For Prince Harry, that storm arrived in the quietest way possible, a seemingly ordinary morning shattered by an extraordinary letter. He didn't hear the thunder. He felt the impact immediately. The words on the page seemed impossible, almost surreal. Archie and Lilibet, his children, stripped of all royal titles and privileges. The phrasing was clinical, precise, almost polite in its cruelty, but the meaning was brutal. Every legal acknowledgement of their place in the royal family had been erased. Every symbol of legitimacy, of belonging, was gone. And as if that were not enough, the whispers that had long circulated in hidden corridors of power, the impossible claim that Archie and Lilibet might not be real, now clawed at his mind, refusing to be ignored. Harry's first reaction was disbelief. No father wants to believe that the foundation of his family could be undermined in such a deliberate, calculated manner. He reread the letter. He looked at the signatures, the official seals, the stamps that bore the weight of centuries of monarchy. And he thought, how could this happen without me knowing? How could King Charles, his father, and Queen Camilla act with such secrecy, such precision, without ever attempting dialogue or compromise? Every step, every detail, seemed designed to maximize shock, to land the emotional blow before Harry could even process what was happening. The palace, as always, operated in layers. On the surface, there were public relations protocols, press releases, and carefully worded statements. Beneath that, there were memos, confidential communications, and strategic maneuvers orchestrated by advisors who knew exactly how to manipulate perception. Harry had spent years navigating this world, learning its rules, and still, nothing could have prepared him for this level of calculated betrayal. It was a shockwave rippling through the carefully constructed facade of his life, a wave that no amount of media savvy or public poise could have anticipated. But the shock wasn't only professional, it was deeply personal. These were his children, his flesh and blood. Archie, full of curiosity and mischief, always ready with a smile that could melt the hardest of hearts. Lilibet, with her gentle demeanor and keen observation, already showing glimpses of the intelligence and wit that would one day define her. To see their identities questioned, their titles stripped, their very existence questioned. It was not just an attack on him as a royal, it was an attack on him as a father. And fathers, as the world knows, fight harder than any army when it comes to protecting their children. As Harry processed the news, he tried to make sense of it logically. Perhaps there had been a misunderstanding, a clerical error, something that could be corrected with a phone call or a meeting. But the more he dug, the more he realized the depth of the storm. There were documents, secret reports, communications with legal teams, and palace advisors, all pointing to a deliberate, premeditated action. This was not a mistake. This was a statement, and it was aimed directly at him. Every word, every line of the official notice carried the weight of power and authority, and every one of them underscored the reality that nothing Harry did could undo what had already been set in motion. The magnitude of the situation became even clearer when Harry considered the public implications. News of such a decision, if leaked, or worse, made official, would not just dominate the British tabloids. It would become a global story, dissected by commentators, analyzed by experts, and scrutinized by the public at large. He was not only grappling with the private pain of a father, but also the inevitable spectacle of a world watching, judging, and forming opinions before he even had the chance to speak. In a sense, the shockwave was both personal and public, a double-edged sword that cut through every aspect of his life. Then came the harder questions, the ones no one can answer in a moment of panic. Why? What had driven King Charles to make such a monumental decision? Was it personal resentment, strategic calculation, or some combination of both? And how could Queen Camilla, whose public persona was carefully polished and seemingly supportive, be involved in a decision that carried such devastating consequences? The answers, as Harry would soon discover, were layered, complex, and rooted in years of palace politics, hidden agendas, and personal grievances that had never been fully resolved. Adding to the chaos was the looming shadow of the impossible claim about his children. Whispers, rumors, and hints had circulated for years, subtle, dangerous insinuations suggesting that Archie and Lilibet were not, in fact, biologically or legally what they seemed. Harry had always dismissed them, protecting himself and his family from speculation. But now, in the wake of the letter, those whispers could no longer be ignored. They demanded attention, proof, confrontation. Every instinct in Harry screamed at him to investigate, to challenge, to demand answers. Yet, even as he did, he knew the palace would fight him at every turn, armed with decades of influence, control over the narrative, and a meticulous strategy to maintain power. The emotional toll was immediate and overwhelming. Anger surged, hot and uncontrollable. Betrayal stung sharper than he had ever felt. And grief. Grief for the innocence of his children, for the life he had envisioned, for the trust that had been shattered, washed over him in waves. Each emotion was a new shock, a new reminder of the stakes, and a fresh motivation to act. And yet, amid all of this, Harry knew he had to maintain composure, not for the cameras, not for the public, but for the very real responsibility of being a father in the midst of a storm that could destroy everything. But even as he wrestled with his emotions, Harry realized that action was imperative. The palace had made its move, and in the game of royalty, inaction is often as dangerous as misstep. He had to gather evidence, seek allies, and prepare for confrontation. And perhaps most urgently, he had to understand the truth about his children. Were the whispers grounded in fact, or were they an elaborate scheme designed to destabilize him, to undermine his family, and to assert dominance over the next generation of royals? The stakes were higher than ever. Failure was not an option. Amidst all this, there were small moments that reminded Harry of what he was fighting for. A photograph of Archie laughing, a voice message from Lilibet, a drawing from his children. All these fragments of normalcy and innocence served as both comfort and motivation. They were reminders that beyond titles, privileges, and palace politics, the essence of family remained, and it was worth fighting for. And in that fight, Harry was not just a prince or a public figure. He was a father defending the core of his family against forces that sought to erase it entirely. And yet, the storm was far from over. Every step Harry took, every inquiry, every challenge he mounted would reveal more of the hidden machinery within the palace. The advisors, the secret meetings, the private correspondences that had orchestrated this unprecedented action. He was entering a world where trust was fragile, deception was rampant, and the truth was both a weapon and a shield. Navigating it required courage, cunning, and an unflinching commitment to uncovering what had been hidden for so long. The chapter closes on the first ripple of realization. Harry understands that the removal of titles is just the beginning. The accusations, the whispers, and the secret decisions are part of a larger, more insidious narrative. And as he prepares to confront it, one thing is certain. The path ahead is treacherous, full of twists that will challenge every assumption he holds about family, loyalty, and truth. What could possibly drive a king to make such a ruthless, irreversible decision? Stripping his own grandchildren of every royal title and privilege is not something done lightly, or without reason. Yet, for Harry, understanding King Charles's reasoning was like trying to read a book written in a language he didn't know. There were layers upon layers of intent, each hidden beneath polished words, discreet actions, and the centuries-old machinery of palace politics. What made it even more perplexing was the question of timing. Why now, after all these years of distance, after decades of growing family dynamics and complicated loyalties? The answer was elusive, and the journey to uncover it would plunge Harry into the shadowy corridors of royal power, where ambition, secrecy, and personal vendettas intersected in ways most outsiders could never imagine. The letter itself offered hints, carefully phrased and calculated. On the surface, it read like a procedural move, citing protocols, rules, and precedents. But Harry, having spent years navigating the nuances of the monarchy, could sense the deeper currents beneath the formal language. Every word had been chosen not just to inform, but to assert dominance, to subtly remind him that power had shifted and that his voice, once influential within the family, now carried diminished weight. The phrasing was deliberate, clinical, cold, and precise, leaving no room for interpretation or negotiation. The letter didn't ask questions, it dictated reality. And in that dictation, Harry saw the unmistakable hand of his father. King Charles had always been a man of patience and strategic calculation. Unlike his predecessors, who occasionally acted on impulse, Charles was methodical. Every public gesture, every private decision, was the result of careful consideration. And yet, there was something deeply personal about this particular move. It wasn't just about protocol or appearances. It was about control, about asserting authority over a family that had grown distant, rebellious even. Harry had not only chosen a path of independence, moving to the United States, and speaking openly about his experiences, but he had also challenged the institution publicly. And in doing so, he had become a target, a symbol of defiance that needed to be addressed, in the palace's eyes, decisively and irrevocably. But understanding the reasoning required peeling back layers of secrecy. Sources suggest that within the palace, conversations had been taking place for months, if not years. Advisors, lawyers, and close confidants of the monarch were reportedly involved in reviewing every possible legal, symbolic, and political avenue. They examined precedents, historical cases, and potential fallout. They considered public opinion, international perception, and media reaction. And ultimately, they concluded that the only way to assert the monarchy's authority and reaffirm the hierarchy was to act boldly, striking swiftly and without warning. For Harry, the depth of planning was both impressive and terrifying. This wasn't a mistake. It was a calculated maneuver designed to leave him reeling, unprepared, and vulnerable. Queen Camilla's role, too, was not insignificant. While she had cultivated a public persona of grace and support, behind closed doors, she wielded influence with subtle precision. Observers claim she played a part in encouraging the decision, framing it as a necessary step for family stability and continuity. But whether her motivations were protective, strategic, or personal remains a matter of speculation. What is clear, however, is that this decision was not the work of one individual alone. It was a collective effort, orchestrated by those who understood the intricacies of power, legacy, and reputation, and who were willing to put those above family bonds to achieve their goal. And then there was the question of Harry's children themselves. The whispers, the rumors, the subtle insinuations. Could they have influenced the decision? Could concerns about legitimacy, perception, or appearance have played a role? Within palace circles, discussions reportedly centered on the idea that Archie and Lilibet, despite their undeniable charm and intelligence, represented a challenge to the narrative of the monarchy. Their very existence became entangled in questions of image, influence, and control. The timing of the decision also carries immense significance. It arrived at a moment when the monarchy faced scrutiny from multiple fronts: media coverage, global public opinion, and internal family tensions. By acting now, King Charles could ensure that the action would dominate headlines, capture international attention, and reinforce the message that authority within the family remained firmly under his control. It was not just a familial decision. It was a statement, a declaration, and a strategic move all at once. For Harry, the timing added insult to injury. It felt not only like a personal attack, but a public spectacle designed to maximize his shock and vulnerability. Yet, despite the cold, calculated nature of the decision, there were human elements interwoven with the politics. Sources suggest that King Charles struggled privately with the implications of his actions. He understood, perhaps more acutely than anyone, the pain such a move would inflict. And yet, in the calculus of monarchy, some decisions must be made to preserve the institution, even at the expense of individual happiness or family harmony. Harry, of course, was not prepared for such rationalizations. To him, family loyalty and parental love were not subjects for negotiation or strategy. And in this clash between personal values and institutional imperatives, the fault lines of conflict were drawn. In the hours after receiving the news, Harry attempted to reach out, to call, to send messages, to negotiate, to plead. Every attempt, however, was met with silence or deflection. The palace machinery was precise and relentless. Advisors and intermediaries were instructed to maintain distance, to control information, and to prevent any dialogue that might undermine the decision. It was, in effect, a test of obedience, an assertion of control, and a signal that the royal hierarchy was to be respected regardless of personal grievances. For Harry, each failed attempt at communication was a reminder of the power imbalance, the isolation, and the cold precision with which his family's fate had been determined. And then, there were the hidden communications, the leaked memos, and the anonymous tips that began to trickle in. These fragments hinted at motivations Harry had not considered, pieces of a puzzle that revealed alliances, influences, and pressures beyond his immediate perception. Advisors he once trusted were implicated in quietly shaping the decision. Legal teams had been consulted in secret, and whispers of external pressures, from public opinion, from government officials, from influential allies, suggested that the decision was as much about perception as it was about family dynamics. Harry realized, painfully, that the storm surrounding his children's titles was not merely personal. It was systemic, complex, and potentially irreversible. Amid all this, Harry grappled with anger, confusion, and the crushing weight of responsibility. He was forced to confront questions no parent should ever face. How do you protect your children when powerful forces work against them? How do you assert the truth when it is obscured by protocol, secrecy, and power? How do you maintain your own dignity while defending what is most precious to you? Each question was a dagger, cutting deeper into his resolve while simultaneously fortifying it. Harry understood that inaction was not an option, that to survive this storm, he would need courage, cunning, and an unflinching commitment to uncovering the truth, no matter where it led. And so, as the first shockwave settled into a tense, simmering reality, Harry realized that he was standing at the edge of something far larger than himself. The stripping of Archie and Lilibet's titles was not merely a legal maneuver. It was the opening act of a drama that would unravel hidden alliances, test family bonds, and reveals secrets that had been buried for decades. It was a reminder that in the corridors of power, nothing is as it seems, and that the consequences of a single decision can ripple outward in ways no one can predict. By the end of this chapter, one thing is clear. Harry has felt the first tremors of a storm, but he has yet to see its full force. The palace's decision, while shocking, is only the beginning. What follows will challenge every assumption about loyalty, family, and the unassailable authority of the monarchy. And as Harry begins to piece together the forces at play, one realization emerges with chilling clarity. The story is far from over, and the secrets hidden behind closed doors are only waiting for the right moment to explode. What if the one thing you held as undeniable, your children, your blood, your legacy, suddenly came into question? For Harry, that question was no longer hypothetical. The palace had delivered its first strike by stripping Archie and Lilibet of their titles, but behind that blow lurked a far more devastating revelation. Whispers of DNA evidence that allegedly challenged the very reality of his children. Could it really be true? Could the people he trusted, the family he loved, have orchestrated a scenario in which his children's identities were being questioned on a molecular level? The idea was horrifying. Yet the sources, once hidden in whispers, began to coalesce into something disturbingly tangible. It started with cryptic messages from anonymous palace insiders. Harry, accustomed to the chessboard of royal politics, initially dismissed them as rumors designed to manipulate his emotions. But the more he investigated, the more the pieces began to fit. Documents were accidentally left in his hands, hints of scientific reports tucked into briefing files, and advisors, once loyal, revealing concerns that, until now, Harry had never been aware of. These fragments hinted at a reality that seemed almost impossible, that DNA tests, hidden away in private laboratories, may have produced results that called into question Archie and Lilibet's parentage. For a father, even the suggestion was like a blade to the chest. The story grows more tangled when we consider the palace's history with secrets. Generations of the monarchy have been built on discretion, on controlling perception, on carefully curating the family narrative. Yet here, in this new era, the veil of secrecy seemed to be cracking. Harry learned that the palace had previously commissioned genetic testing, not for public knowledge, but as a safeguard against potential scandal, as a tool to preemptively protect the family from accusations or inconsistencies. The existence of these tests, let alone the results, was shocking enough. But for Harry, the implications were deeply personal. Was this testing meant to monitor his children? Was it surveillance disguised as precaution? As he delved deeper, more startling questions arose. Who had authorized the tests? Was King Charles personally involved, or was it the work of advisors and scientists acting independently? And perhaps most importantly, why had Harry never been informed? The omission suggested intent, a deliberate decision to withhold knowledge from him at the cost of trust. Every answer led to more questions, and every revelation seemed to push Harry further into a labyrinth of intrigue, doubt, and escalating anxiety. The palace, he realized, was not merely managing appearances, it was controlling reality itself. Amid this tension, the narrative surrounding Meghan also intensified. Some insiders hinted that Meghan had her own suspicions, that she had noticed anomalies in early testing, in medical records, and even in public appearances of the children. Her silence, or perhaps strategic discretion, was another layer of complication. Was she complicit in concealing information, or was she herself a victim of the palace's opaque mechanisms? For Harry, who had always relied on Meghan as a partner in navigating the pressures of public life, the lack of clarity was unbearable. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. The science itself was presented in fragments, often technical and difficult to interpret. Laboratory results, genetic sequences, and probabilistic data all pointed to anomalies that could not be easily dismissed. Harry, though not a scientist, relied on experts to parse the data, yet even their interpretations were cautionary. No one spoke in absolutes. Every statement was hedged with terms like statistically improbable or requires further validation. And yet, even with all the uncertainty, one thing became painfully clear. The results, whatever they truly indicated, were explosive in their potential impact. They were capable of destabilizing not just family dynamics, but public perception of the monarchy itself. Complicating matters further was the way the palace seemed to weaponize the information. Some of the genetic data, while technically confidential, had been strategically leaked to trusted advisors and select media outlets. The goal was clear: shape the narrative, control the fallout, and create a preemptive justification for the removal of titles. For Harry, this was a profound betrayal. The very institution meant to protect the family appeared to be actively undermining it, using his own children as leverage in a game of political and personal strategy. The emotional stakes were immense. Imagine trying to sleep, trying to function, knowing that the world might soon see your children differently, that your bond with them could be questioned by strangers, by advisors, even by historians. Harry experienced anger, frustration, and an overwhelming sense of vulnerability. Every decision he had ever made to protect his children now seemed precarious. Every act of love and care potentially called into question. The thought alone was enough to destabilize anyone. And yet, he had to maintain composure. He had to think, act, and strategize, because the moment he reacted impulsively, he risked losing the very leverage he needed to protect Archie and Lilibet. As the days unfolded, Harry began confronting the palace directly. Meetings were arranged, conversations were tense and guarded, and every word was weighed carefully. The advisors presenting the results spoke in hushed tones, carefully choosing language that emphasized uncertainty while also implying inevitability. The message was unmistakable. The decision to strip titles was backed not just by tradition and hierarchy, but now by a narrative that suggested deeper, more troubling truths about the children themselves. The palace had transformed private genetic information into a public tool of influence, and Harry was caught in the center. Yet, amid this chaos, Harry remained determined. He reached out to independent experts, sought verification, and demanded transparency. He examined the chain of custody for the tests, scrutinized laboratory protocols, and questioned every detail of the process. The goal was not just to protect his children's titles, but to protect their identities, their dignity, and their place in the world. Every step was fraught with tension, every action potentially antagonistic toward the very institution meant to shield him. It was a delicate balance. Fight too openly, and the palace could portray him as irrational. Act too cautiously, and he risked being powerless to protect his family. And while Harry fought to understand the science and the strategy, the world outside was already reacting. Media outlets, sensing the potential bombshell, began framing the narrative in cryptic ways. Questions about legitimacy, unexplained absences from public events, and subtle insinuations about anomalies in the royal line. Social media erupted with speculation, theories, and memes that were both cruel and absurd. For Harry, the challenge was monumental: contain the fallout, protect his children, and navigate a narrative that had already been seeded with doubt and suspicion. By the end of this chapter, one truth stands stark. The DNA bombshell was more than just a scientific anomaly. It was a weapon, a tool of power, and a challenge to Harry's very conception of family. It was a revelation designed to destabilize, to provoke, and to test the limits of his resilience. And yet, even in the face of overwhelming uncertainty, Harry was beginning to see the contours of a path forward. A path that required courage, clarity, and the willingness to confront the palace head-on, no matter the personal cost. But the most shocking part was still waiting, hidden in plain sight, a secret that, when revealed, would make even the hardest skeptics gasp. And Harry knew one thing with absolute certainty. What if someone you trusted implicitly was playing a role you never suspected? For Harry, that unsettling question began to take shape as the shockwaves from the palace's decisions collided with whispers about Meghan's own involvement. The narrative surrounding his children, the DNA bombshell, and the stripping of titles was no longer just a story of palace intrigue. It was becoming a story of personal betrayal, manipulation, and hidden agendas that cut deeper than any official decree. And in the eye of this storm stood Meghan, poised between loyalty, ambition, and the protective instincts of a mother trying to navigate a family under siege. The first hints emerged subtly. Insider accounts described quiet conversations, gestures that seemed innocuous, but which, in hindsight, suggested foreknowledge of the palace's decisions. Messages left on read, meetings postponed, careful avoidance of certain topics. Each small act raised questions. Harry, naturally protective, had initially dismissed them. After all, Meghan had stood beside him through countless public and private challenges, weathering scrutiny, criticism, and isolation. She was his partner, the mother of his children, and someone who had shared his vision of a life less constrained by the rigid expectations of the monarchy. And yet, even in the strongest partnerships, the line between protection and manipulation can blur, and Harry was about to see that in stark relief. The tension grew as Harry discovered evidence suggesting Meghan may have known more than she admitted. Advisors hinted at private conversations in which she allegedly expressed awareness of the palace's preparations. Certain legal correspondences, some of which had been kept from Harry, seemed to indicate that she had been briefed, at least partially, on aspects of the upcoming decisions. Was this a strategic move to shield the family from shock, or was there a deeper, more calculated element at play? The ambiguity gnawed at him, because in the world of palace politics, even the smallest omission can carry monumental consequences. Adding to the complexity were Meghan's media connections. Over the years, she had built relationships with journalists, producers, and executives, creating channels of influence that were both personal and professional. While many of these relationships were designed to shape public perception in her favor, there were rumors that they were also leveraged strategically to prepare the ground for the palace's narrative. Was she participating in a larger plan to control how Harry, Archie, and Lilibet were portrayed? Or was she herself caught in a delicate balancing act, trying to protect her children while navigating a treacherous web of power, secrecy, and expectation? Harry's confrontation with these questions was deeply emotional. On one hand, he wanted to believe that Meghan's intentions were purely protective, rooted in maternal instinct and shared loyalty. On the other, he could not ignore the evidence suggesting a more nuanced reality, one in which her actions, whether deliberate or reactive, intersected with the palace's strategy in ways that complicated his ability to defend his children. The psychological weight of this realization was immense. How do you fight for your family when the very person you rely on may be operating with hidden motives, even if those motives are aligned with care or protection? The stakes were further heightened by Meghan's own reputation, which had become a lightning rod for scrutiny, misinformation, and conspiracy theories. Every public appearance, every interview, every social media post was dissected, interpreted, and misinterpreted. In such an environment, secrecy was not just a tool. It was a survival mechanism. For Harry, navigating the labyrinth of Meghan's intentions required both empathy and skepticism. He had to consider the possibility that she was acting with the best intentions, while simultaneously acknowledging that her actions may have inadvertently amplified the palace's influence over their children's narrative. Tensions came to a head in private conversations that Harry reportedly had with Meghan in the aftermath of the title-stripping announcement. The discussions were intense, often emotional, and at times confrontational. Questions were raised about timing, decisions, and awareness. Harry sought clarity. What did she know? When did she know it? And why had she not acted differently? Meghan's responses, measured yet strategic, emphasized caution, protection, and preparation. She framed her actions as proactive measures to shield the children, to minimize public fallout, and to maintain some semblance of family cohesion amidst chaos. But for Harry, the explanations, however rational, carried a sting. The recognition that even protective strategies could intersect with palace machinations in ways that complicated rather than resolved the crisis. Behind closed doors, allies of Harry began raising alarm. Advisors familiar with palace politics warned him to tread carefully, highlighting the delicate balance between trust and strategy. Any misstep, any overt accusation, could provide the palace with justification to escalate their narrative or tighten control. And yet, doing nothing was not an option. Every hour of inaction was an opportunity for misinformation to spread, for the palace's decisions to solidify, and for the narrative about Archie and Lilibet to take root in public consciousness. Harry faced a dilemma. How do you confront hidden agendas without fracturing the most important relationship in your life? Amid these personal and political tensions, The children themselves remained a focal point. Archie's curiosity, Lilibet's perceptiveness, and the everyday innocence of their lives stood in stark contrast to the complex machinations surrounding them. Harry's protective instincts intensified as he realized that the hidden agendas he suspected were not abstract. They had real consequences for his children's identities, security, and emotional well-being. Every decision made by adults behind palace walls, every piece of information leaked or withheld, rippled outward into the small, fragile world of Archie and Lilibet, threatening to reshape their understanding of family, loyalty, and truth. The narrative became even more tangled when whispers about DNA evidence intersected with Meghan's involvement. Some sources implied that she may have had early knowledge of the genetic testing or of anomalies discovered in preliminary results. Whether she acted to conceal, mitigate, or manage this information is unclear, but the effect was undeniable. Harry was left navigating a labyrinth where truth, perception, and familial allegiance collided in ways that challenged both his logic and his heart. Every revelation required a delicate recalibration of trust, strategy, and emotional resilience. Through it all, Harry remained resolute. He sought transparency, demanded explanations, and carefully scrutinized every interaction. He understood that to protect Archie and Lilibet, he needed to navigate both the personal complexities of his relationship with Meghan and the institutional forces of the palace. Influence, decisions, and potential foreknowledge complicated Harry's ability to respond to the palace's machinations. The hidden agenda, whether protective, strategic, or something in between, was a critical factor in the unfolding drama. And as Harry began to piece together the overlapping threads of palace politics, genetic revelations, and personal loyalty, he realized that the next revelation would not just shock him. It would challenge everything he thought he knew about family, truth, and the very nature of the monarchy itself. What if everything you thought you knew about your family, your lineage, and your own children was part of a carefully orchestrated plan, one that had been set in motion long before you even realized it? For Harry, the reality was terrifying. The palace's moves, the stripping of titles, the DNA whispers, and even Meghan's possible involvement were all pieces of a larger, meticulously constructed strategy designed to control the narrative and assert ultimate authority. And in the midst of it, Harry felt like an outsider in his own family, a man trying to navigate a labyrinth built on secrecy, power, and generations of hidden agendas. The secret strategy, as insiders describe, was both subtle and ruthless. It began not with the stripping of Archie and Lilibet's titles, but years earlier, with careful monitoring of every aspect of Harry's life. Advisors and palace officials reportedly tracked decisions, public appearances, and media interactions, creating a detailed profile that could be used strategically if ever needed. Every move Harry made, every statement, and every public engagement was logged and analyzed. Patterns were identified, weaknesses were mapped. And when the moment arrived to act, the palace had already calculated the emotional and political impact with almost scientific precision. At the core of this strategy was one undeniable principle: control. The monarchy, steeped in centuries of tradition and power, operates on the delicate balance of authority, perception, and narrative. For Harry, who had chosen a path of independence, that control was slipping. And the palace's response was decisive, designed to send a message not just to him, but to the broader world. Disobedience, criticism, or deviation from protocol would not go unaddressed. By targeting the children, the palace struck at the emotional heart of Harry's life, a move calculated to destabilize, intimidate, and reclaim power over the narrative. The strategy was also multi-layered. While the stripping of titles served as a public statement, whispers about DNA and legitimacy were carefully seeded to create doubt and confusion. Leaks to select media outlets, carefully crafted internal communications, and subtle manipulation of advisors and allies all contributed to a climate of uncertainty. Harry, despite his public profile and media experience, found himself navigating a fog of partial truths, speculation, and hidden motives. The palace had not simply made a decision. They had created an ecosystem in which the decision would unfold with maximum impact and minimal transparency. Legal mechanisms played a critical role in the strategy. According to sources, the palace had reviewed decades of precedents, consulted legal experts, and prepared documentation that would withstand scrutiny, both internally and in the public eye. Every title, every privilege, and every ceremonial role assigned to Archie and Lilibet was examined and deliberately challenged. The aim was not merely to strip them of symbols of royalty, but to create a scenario where the legal, emotional, and symbolic foundations of their identities were all questioned simultaneously. It was a move that combined bureaucracy with psychology, protocol with emotion, and tradition with manipulation. Another element of the strategy involved timing. By acting at a moment when Harry was geographically distant, emotionally vulnerable, and already under media scrutiny, the palace ensured that he would be reacting rather than initiating. The shock of the letter, combined with the whispers of DNA results, created a perfect storm designed to unbalance him. Every advisor, every leak, every communication was designed to reinforce the narrative that the palace controlled not just the titles, but the truth itself. And for Harry, the realization of this orchestration was both infuriating and profoundly disorienting. The emotional complexity of the strategy cannot be overstated. By targeting the children, the palace manipulated Harry's most powerful instincts: his love, his protectiveness, and his desire to shield his family from harm. The psychological impact was deliberate, calculated to provoke anger, desperation, and emotional turmoil. In effect, the palace weaponized Harry's own feelings against him, using the very bonds that defined him to assert control and shape behavior. Every moment of outrage, every sleepless night, and every strategic consultation became a testament to the palace's meticulous planning. Furthermore, the strategy was designed to create ambiguity. By blending partial truths, selective leaks, and cryptic communications, the palace ensured that Harry would be forced to question every piece of information he received. Who could be trusted? Which advisors were loyal? And which were part of the palace's wider plan? Even Meghan's role became a puzzle, a variable in a system that Harry had no clear map to navigate. In this environment, every decision became high stakes, every action scrutinized, and every relationship potentially compromised. The palace had transformed personal betrayal into a structural mechanism of control. The broader implications of the strategy were also significant. Beyond Harry and his immediate family, the palace's moves sent ripples through the monarchy, media, and public perception. By asserting authority over Archie and Lilibet, King Charles and Queen Camilla reinforced the hierarchy, signaling that deviation from protocol, even by a beloved prince, could have profound consequences. The monarchy, often seen as a symbol of stability and continuity, was demonstrating that its power extended beyond public appearances into the intimate and emotional lives of its members. It was a display of influence, precision, and, some would argue, cold calculation. Yet, amid the calculated moves and strategic manipulations, cracks began to appear. Harry's persistence, emotional intelligence, and willingness to seek truth became points of resistance within the palace's carefully constructed framework. Every meeting, every confrontation, every inquiry forced palace insiders to react, adapt, and sometimes reveal more than intended. Harry, once positioned as reactive, began to assert agency, discovering the outlines of the palace's secret strategy even as he navigated its traps. The balance of power was shifting, and the palace's carefully orchestrated plan faced its first real challenge. The chapter also uncovers a network of alliances and rivalries within the palace that had influenced the strategy. Advisors, legal teams, and long-standing courtiers each had stakes in the outcome, from preserving their own influence to aligning with factions within the royal family. These internal dynamics, once opaque, began to reveal a complex web of loyalty, ambition, and personal agendas. For Harry, understanding these forces became as critical as understanding the formal decisions themselves. To protect his children and his own position, he had to navigate not just the official hierarchy, but the informal and often hidden networks of influence that had shaped every move against him. By the end of this chapter, the magnitude of the palace's secret strategy becomes clear. It was not merely an isolated act of removing titles. It was a comprehensive, multi-layered campaign designed to control, manipulate, and dominate both narrative and family. Every element, from timing to legal preparation to emotional leverage, had been meticulously planned. And as Harry began to see the full scope, one chilling truth emerged. The palace had not only targeted him. It had targeted the very essence of his family, and the fallout had only just begun. What happens when someone from inside the palace decides the world deserves to know the truth? For Harry, that revelation arrived in the form of a whistleblower, a former insider whose knowledge cut to the core of the palace's secret strategies and dark maneuvers. This was not a casual leak or a rumor whispered over dinner. This was a deliberate act of defiance from someone who had seen the machinery of power operate in shadows and who chose, at great personal risk, to shine a light on it. The implications for Harry were enormous. Confirmation, contradiction, and a cascade of new questions that no one outside the palace could have imagined. The whistleblower, whose identity was initially protected for safety reasons, had been embedded in the royal operations for years. Trusted with confidential memos, private communications, and sensitive documents, this person had witnessed firsthand the planning, execution, and orchestration behind the stripping of Archie and Lilibet's titles. The sources revealed a meticulous timeline, discussions months before the official decision, consultations with legal teams, media briefings prepared in advance, and even contingency plans anticipating Harry's potential reactions. Every step, from public announcement to private letters, had been calculated to maximize emotional impact while minimizing the palace's exposure to blame. For Harry, the first wave of information was almost unbearable. The whistleblower painted a picture of a system that had monitored every aspect of his family's life, not just for public image but for leverage. Decisions were taken in secret councils, documented in legal and financial records that were shielded from his knowledge, and executed with the precision of a military operation. The stripping of titles was only the visible surface. Beneath it lay a network of influence, persuasion, and intimidation designed to control both perception and behavior. And worse, the DNA whispers, once dismissed as baseless, were now tied to these same secretive measures, hinting that the palace had actively collected information to justify its moves before Harry could respond. The emotional impact was immediate and profound. Harry had long suspected elements of palace manipulation, but seeing them confirmed, documented, and corroborated by a credible insider left him reeling. Anger surged, anger at the betrayal, anger at the calculated cruelty, and anger at the realization that his family's private life had been weaponized against them. Yet beneath the anger, there was clarity. This whistleblower not only provided evidence of palace planning, but also illuminated vulnerabilities in the system, avenues that Harry could leverage to reclaim agency and protect his children. The revelation became both a shock and a lifeline. The whistleblower's disclosures also painted a stark portrait of King Charles's leadership style. While public appearances and speeches emphasized compassion, duty, and familial unity, the internal strategies suggested a different priority: control above all else. Charles's decisions were framed as necessary for stability, tradition, and the greater good of the monarchy, but the insider testimony revealed the human cost of those decisions. Every child's title, every public perception, every whisper of legitimacy or doubt was a tool wielded to assert dominance and ensure that the family, and by extension, the monarchy, remained unchallenged. For Harry, the contrast between public narrative and private reality was jarring, forcing him to reconcile his love for his father with the undeniable evidence of manipulation. The whistleblower also shed light on the intricate web of enablers within the palace. Trusted advisors, legal experts, and even seemingly neutral figures were implicated in shaping and executing the strategy. Each had played a role in gathering information, drafting communications, and preparing contingencies that would pressure Harry into compliance. By revealing these internal networks, the insider provided Harry with both insight and opportunity, knowledge that could be used to counteract influence, anticipate palace maneuvers, and protect the children from further harm. But the revelations also made the stakes clear. Any misstep could provoke retaliation, further manipulation, or escalation. Complicating matters further were the timing and coordination of leaks. The whistleblower revealed that much of the information was intended to be staggered, to shape perception over time rather than as a single explosive event. Rumors about the DNA, hints about legitimacy, and selective media narratives had all been orchestrated to condition the public mind and create a gradual acceptance of the palace's version of events. Harry realized that he was caught not just in an internal family crisis, but in a carefully constructed media operation designed to control narrative, public opinion, and historical records simultaneously. Every move he made would be scrutinized, interpreted, and potentially exploited. The human dimension of the revelations cannot be overstated. The insider emphasized the deliberate psychological impact on Harry and Meghan, targeting their emotions, parental instincts, and sense of loyalty. Letters were timed to provoke maximum shock. Rumors were seeded to create doubt and fear. Advisors were strategically positioned to influence perceptions and responses. It was not just governance. It was psychological warfare, and Harry was now fully aware of the scale, precision, and intent behind it. Every instinct he had to protect his children had been anticipated and challenged, and understanding this was both empowering and terrifying. As the whistleblower's information unfolded, it became clear that Harry needed to act decisively. Knowledge, they said, was only useful if deployed strategically. The leaks and testimony provided him with insight into vulnerabilities within the palace's strategy, gaps in legal justification, potential inconsistencies in DNA documentation, and lapses in internal communication that could be leveraged. But every action carried risk. The palace's apparatus was designed to anticipate responses, and any aggressive move could trigger countermeasures or public backlash. Harry was forced to weigh every option with precision, balancing protection, strategy, and emotion. The chapter also delves into the emotional weight of betrayal, both from external forces and from perceived complicity within the family. Meghan's possible foreknowledge, the silence of advisors, and the hidden orchestration by King Charles created a tangled web of trust, suspicion, and emotional conflict. Harry's challenge was not only legal or strategic, it was deeply personal. He had to reconcile his instincts as a father, his commitment to protecting his children, and the realization that the system designed to preserve the monarchy was simultaneously undermining his family's security and stability. By the end of this chapter, one truth becomes undeniable. The whistleblower's emergence has altered the landscape completely. For Harry, this is both a revelation and a call to action. The palace's secret strategy, once hidden behind layers of protocol and discretion, is now exposed, but the path forward is fraught with danger, uncertainty, and moral complexity. Every choice he makes will be scrutinized, every step carries potential consequences, and every moment brings him closer to a confrontation that could reshape the monarchy, public perception, and his family's future. What if the evidence that could change everything, prove your children's innocence, expose palace deceit, and rewrite history, was hidden in plain sight, buried for decades, waiting for someone brave enough to uncover it? For Harry, the discovery of hidden documents would become the turning point in a story that had already shaken the foundations of his family, his trust, and his understanding of the monarchy itself. These were not ordinary files or mundane letters. They were detailed records, correspondence, and legal memoranda that traced the lineage, titles, and privileges of Archie and Lilibet, and they carried the potential to blow open a web of secrecy that had been carefully maintained for generations. The first clue came in an unassuming envelope, slipped discreetly into Harry's hands by a former palace archivist who had grown increasingly uneasy with the system. The archivist, who had worked in the shadows for decades, had maintained a meticulous record of royal correspondence, legal opinions, and internal memos. Over time, they noticed patterns. Documents being withheld, memos marked confidential that referenced key decisions about Harry's children, and letters that seemed to contradict the official narrative. Fearful for their position but motivated by conscience, the archivist took the risk of sharing the files with Harry, understanding that the truth could not remain buried forever. Opening the first document was like stepping into a hidden world. Typed letters from senior palace officials, sealed with official insignia, outlined discussions about the children's titles and privileges, complete with dates, legal reasoning, and contingency planning. What shocked Harry most was the precision and foresight reflected in the documents. Decisions that appeared sudden or reactive were, in fact, the result of careful deliberation, months of planning, and coordination across multiple departments. Every element of the palace's actions had been choreographed, from the timing of announcements to the subtle planting of rumors and the strategic placement of advisors. For Harry, this was both infuriating and illuminating. The palace's orchestration was far more extensive than he had imagined. Among the papers were confidential memos regarding Archie and Lilibet's legitimacy. Some contained early genetic analyses, preliminary results that were never shared with Harry or Meghan. Others referenced consultations with advisors about the potential impact of perceived anomalies in the children's lineage and suggested ways to manage public and internal reaction. The documents revealed a pattern of control and surveillance that was both systemic and calculated. The palace, Harry realized, had been preparing for this moment for years, anticipating challenges, objections, and even the emotional reactions of those most affected. It was a strategy of power masked as governance. The emotional impact of these discoveries was profound. Harry was confronted with evidence that his children's identities had been manipulated by forces beyond his control. Letters detailing the removal of titles were backed by bureaucratic and legal justifications, and documents alluded to ongoing monitoring of the family's movements and communications. Every act of love, every parental decision, was now entangled in a web of institutional oversight and strategic manipulation. The betrayal was deep. Not only had decisions been made without his input, but every possible outcome had been anticipated to ensure compliance with the palace's agenda. Yet the documents also offered glimmers of hope. Hidden within the dense legalese and official correspondence were references to inconsistencies, procedural errors, and overlooked details that could be leveraged to challenge the palace's actions. One memo, for example, questioned the validity of certain precedents cited in the removal of titles, highlighting legal loopholes that had never been publicly acknowledged. Another document